A thunderous rumble chased the horizon, echoing across the vast Wyoming plains as Lily Harrington pressed herself against the chilled rock. Her fingernails bit into stone, her breath ragged from flight and terror. Moments earlier, she had heard the dying screams of her fellow travelers, men, women, and children, bound west in hope of new beginnings, snuffed out by gunfire and savage blades. Now she was alone, a trembling silhouette in a hidden cave. Yet even amid the darkness, Lily sensed eyes upon her, tracking her every step. She wondered who or what followed her so relentlessly across the expanse, and if they came as friend or foe. Lily Harrington had been just 19 years old when she first laid eyes upon the western horizon from the Missouri River crossing. She came from a modest background in St. Louis. Her father was a cooper, her mother long deceased from consumption. With no siblings to keep her rooted, Lily clung to the prospect of forging a new life on the frontier, a place rumored to be brimming with promise for those courageous enough to make the journey. The wagon caravan that she joined was not unusual for the times. A handful of families, a few prospectors, and a couple of storekeepers lugging their wares westward formed a ragtag convoy along the old Oregon Trail. They bickered over small things, portions of daily rations, the best times to travel, or whose turn it was to keep watch through the night. But they also shared quiet camaraderie. Every evening, the circle of wagons drew close around a campfire, children shrieking in play, while the grown-ups conferred in low voices about the next day's route. Hope burned bright in Lily's heart whenever someone mentioned an untamed future, the smell of adventure drifting in the wind. She was not naive. She knew of the dangers, disease, unpredictable weather, and the threat of raids. Still, something in her soul yearned for a place beyond the city's cramped streets. The West, with its vastness and wild promise, called to her. She remembered the day they crossed into Wyoming territory. The sky stretched so wide it seemed endless. Grasslands rippled like a green ocean, and mountains loomed purple in the distance. Standing on the crest of a small ridge, Lily felt an inexplicable sense of belonging. Little did she know that in just a short time, all that she cherished would be torn apart in a whirlwind of violence. The trouble began at sunset. After another day's grueling travel, the caravan halted near a shallow creek, setting up camp under cottonwoods that cast long dancing shadows in the crimson dusk. Children chased each other among the wagons, shrieking with laughter. One mother stirred a pot of venison stew, its savory aroma mingling with the earthy scent of the plains. A prospector named Harold even produced a battered fiddle, and as the first chords of a tune floated into the air, Lily felt an unfamiliar twinge of pure delight. While Lily helped to distribute supper among the younger children, she noticed a tall stranger standing on the periphery. He was not part of their usual group, and none of the other travelers seemed to pay him heed. Wrapped in a dusty coat and wide-brimmed hat, the man exuded an unsettling aura. His eyes, she observed from a distance, flickered with an almost predatory glint in the firelight. She felt a chill despite the warmth of the flames. The man vanished as suddenly as he had appeared, melting into the twilight beyond the wagons. Lily tried to ask around, who was he? Did anyone else see him? But the families were too engrossed in their own small joys and chores to take notice. Her friend Sarah, newly wedded, and riding with her husband on the wagon behind Lily's, teased that Lily was seeing ghosts. Yet Lily could not rid herself of the sense of foreboding. She decided to stay vigilant, lingering by the campfire after most had retired. Hours later, when the last of the glowing embers died away, Lily saw something, several shapes moving in the dark, too fluid and calculated to be mere wildlife. Fear seized her heart, but she stayed silent, uncertain if she was imagining things or if real danger lurked just beyond the last flicker of light. The night was still when the attack commenced. It began with a single gunshot echoing across the plains. Then came the stampede of horses, their hooves pounding like thunder. Lily sprang awake, heart hammering. She saw flames bursting from one wagon, set ablaze by a torch hurled through the canvas. Shouts and screams erupted everywhere. In the flickering chaos, the same tall stranger Lily had spotted earlier galloped into the camp, his face contorted in a hateful snarl. Shots rang out in rapid succession. Women scrambled to gather children. Men fumbled to load rifles. But the attackers were swift, well-armed, and brutally organized. Lily remembered the anguished cry of old Mr. Reeves, the storekeeper, as a bullet tore through his chest. She watched helplessly as Sarah stumbled in the darkness, only to be dragged away by a rough hand. Everything whirled into pandemonium, smoke, gunfire, sparks from the burning wagons swirling overhead. Amid the melee, Lily raced to the wagon that held her small trunk of belongings, desperate for anything to defend herself. But her trembling fingers failed her. The trunk refused to open fast enough, and by the time she grasped a rusty pistol from the bottom, an attacker had already dismounted. He advanced, weapon raised. Fate intervened in a moment's distraction. Someone cried out behind him, and as he turned, Lily darted under the wagon's canvas. She crawled blindly into the darkness, chest tight with fear. Flames cast demonic shadows against the ground. Everywhere she looked, she saw bodies strewn like rag dolls. Screams pierced the night until they were abruptly silenced, replaced by the acrid stench of gunpowder and blood. She had never known terror like this. In the last seconds of that hellish assault, Lily caught a glimpse of a figure on horseback, a slender shape, not quite among the attackers perched at the outskirts. Then another shot rang out, and Lily's world became a swirl of dust and horror. When dawn finally crept over the horizon, Lily was huddled in the partial remains of a shattered wagon. The raiders had left before first light, presumably to avoid detection by any cavalry patrols rumored to roam these parts. Silence settled across the camp, a silence so profound it bore the finality of death. Lily swallowed back tears as she crawled through the rubble and bodies searching for survivors. She found none. Her foot caught on a fallen rifle, the barrel bent and the stock splintered. She pried it from a dead man's grip, only to realize it was useless. Her thirst roared, but the water barrels were either emptied or destroyed. Grief mingled with confusion and rage. How could everything unravel so quickly? She scanned the horizon, half expecting the killers to return at any moment. A single flicker of hope emerged, perhaps. If she fled to Fort Laramie, the cavalry stationed there might help. Fort Laramie was real, a known stronghold in Wyoming territory for westward travelers, but Lily doubted she could make it alone. It was days away on foot, and the bandits might still prowl these trails. The sun's heat pressed down on her battered body, scorching her exposed skin as she forced her trembling legs to carry her away from the massacre site. On a grassy hill overlooking the camp, she glimpsed what looked like an outcropping of rock, possibly a cave. With ragged breaths, she ascended the slope. Indeed, it was a narrow cavern, hidden by a scraggly patch of juniper bushes. Lily stumbled inside the welcome darkness, cooling her dusty face. Only after she sank against the cool stone did she allow herself to sob each tear etched with the memory of the horrific night. She did not know it yet, but her tracks through the tall grass had not gone unnoticed. Lily's exhausted body crumpled against the cavern's rough interior. Hours slipped by, as she drifted in and out of uneasy sleep. The trauma of the massacre stitched itself into her dreams, transforming every rustle of wind into the crack of gunfire, every flicker of light into torch flames devouring wagons. When she awoke to a faint shuffle echoing from deeper within the cave, her heart lurched, her throat was parched, and terror beat in her chest. She gripped the small knife she had scavenged from the wreckage, a pitiful defense, but all she had. Holding her breath, she listened. The shuffle came again. Her mind raced with possibilities. A wild animal, another survivor. Or was it one of the attackers silently trailing her? She crept further into the cavern, pressing a hand to the rocky wall for balance. The gloom swallowed her vision after a few steps. Instinctively she stopped, uncertain whether to venture deeper or to flee back into the daylight. Then she heard a soft exhale, a distinctly human sound, and a faint glimmer of light, as if reflected off metal. Fear spiked within her like a burning brand, summoning what little courage she had left. Lily called out in a trembling voice, "Who's there, Silence?" A flicker of motion in the darkness. She raised her knife, though it shook in her grip before she could blink. A shape glided forward, a man slender in build with dark braided hair, wearing buckskin leggings and a fringed shirt. He wore a single eagle feather behind his ear, and in his hand glinted a short leather-bound blade. For an instant their eyes locked, Lily's wide with terror, his calm and assessing. In that still moment neither attacked, yet neither yielded ground. Unbeknownst to Lily, her next choice would decide her fate. Tension hung between them like a taut bowstring. Lily clutched her knife, wondering if she could truly bring herself to use it. The man's expression was stern, yet not immediately hostile. He took a step back, lowering his blade ever so slightly. Cautiously he gestured to his chest and spoke a single word in a low, melodic voice. Wama Lily didn't understand the meaning, but she surmised it might be his name. Fear pounded in her veins as she realized he was Cheyenne, one of the many tribes the Wagon families had spoken about, often in hushed tones of both caution and respect. For a moment, Lily wondered if it was the Cheyenne who had orchestrated the massacre. But something in Wama's composure refuted that suspicion. There was none of the cruel triumph she had seen in the raiders. Instead, his gaze flicked to her ragged appearance, her torn dress, bruised arms, and tear-streaked face. He seemed to understand her vulnerability. Through pantomime and halting words, Lily tried to communicate. She pointed to herself. "Lily." Then she gestured outside, made a motion of gunfire with her hands, and feigned falling, his brow furrowed. He nodded slowly, as if recognizing the aftermath of violence. Wama reached into a small pouch slung over his shoulder, retrieving a water skin. Hesitantly, he offered it. Desperation triumphed over Lily's fear. She took a tentative sip from the skin, the water bringing momentary relief to her parched throat. She saw no deceit in his eyes. The question of what would happen next loomed large. Would he help her, or was this merely the preamble to another betrayal? In the creeping darkness of the cave, they stood as two survivors on opposite sides of a vast cultural divide, each uncertain of the other's motives, yet inexplicably bound by fate. When daylight reached the cavern's mouth again, Wama wordlessly beckoned Lily to follow him outside. She hesitated. The last time she was out in the open, her entire wagon party had been slaughtered. Yet the cave was no sanctuary. It offered only darkness, stale air, and the possibility of hidden dangers. Summoning her resolve, she stepped into the sunlight, blinking away spots as her eyes adjusted. Together, they surveyed the aftermath. Smoke no longer rose from the ruined wagons, but the scent of charred wood and death lingered. Wama moved among the wreckage with measured caution. Although Lily's heart twisted at the sight of lifeless bodies, she realized her Cheyenne companion moved with solemn respect. He knelt beside each victim, pausing in silent acknowledgement. It was not the behavior of a man responsible for such wanton brutality. In a hushed moment, Lily guided Wama to the battered trunk that she had tried to open the night of the attack. After some effort, the lid splintered. Inside, she found a few scraps of clothing, a small leather journal, and a handful of cartridges for her broken pistol. Most of her cherished keepsakes, remnants of her old life, lay in ruins. Wama, meanwhile, discovered a functioning rifle tossed aside in the dirt. He tested its mechanism. The barrel, though dusty, was intact. He handed it to Lily, but she shook her head, feeling too overwhelmed to use it. Instead, he slung it over his back. They searched for supplies, dried food, water skins, blankets, anything that might help them survive. The necessity of cooperation sank in. Neither could manage alone in these hostile plains. Not with the shadow of the raiders still looming. Unspoken yet palpable, an alliance formed. They would travel together, at least for now. Two strangers bound by necessity against a world gone mad. The bodies were gently laid beneath heaps of gathered stones. Lily watched Wama perform a simple ritual, an offering of a small tobacco pouch, while murmuring words in his native tongue. She did not grasp the specifics, but the sincerity touched her. When they finished, the two stood side by side, silent in shared sorrow. Lily's mind churned with the memory of Scream's gunfire and that tall stranger who led the attack. She wanted justice, or failing that vengeance. Wama caught her gaze drifting to the open plains, and with a soft grunt, he pointed to the ground. At first, Lily saw only grass, but as she stepped closer, she noticed a distinct trail of flattened blades and hoof prints heading northwest. Whoever orchestrated the massacre had left tracks, deep, angry prints that indicated a swift departure. Lily's hands curled into fists. She recalled how the stranger's eyes shone with malevolence in the firelight. She longed to find him, though fear pricked at her. What could she, a barely armed woman, do against such a man? Yet Wama seemed interested in the trail as well. His brow furrowed with determination. Was he also seeking retribution? Or did he simply want to understand who had crossed his people's land in such violence? Lily could not say. They gathered what meager supplies they could salvage, a few cans of beans, some half-ruined flour, and the water skin that Wama so generously shared. Then, with hearts heavy and eyes vigilant, they began to follow the hoofprints. The wide Wyoming sky expanded overhead, the sun unrelenting. Each step through the waist-high grass reminded Lily how exposed they were out here. How easy it might be for ambush, but the pull of the raiders' trail was irresistible. Somewhere on the horizon was the promise of answers, or perhaps a second, even deadlier reckoning. Morning drifted into afternoon. The plains shimmered under the noonday sun, and Lily's throat felt as dry as the dust swirling around her boots. Wama paused at a small spring concealed behind a cluster of thorny shrubs. Grateful Lily knelt to drink, letting the cool water wash away the taste of despair. She splashed her face, running shaky fingers through her sweat-dampened hair. As they pressed onward, she thought about Fort Laramie. A large military presence was stationed there, known to offer refuge at times. But Lily had also heard stories of uneasy relations between the fort soldiers and the native tribes. Distrust festered on both sides, fueled by past broken treaties and violent encounters. She glanced at Wama, who strode with grace and purpose, scanning the horizon, as if reading some silent message in the wind. She wondered if he feared the cavalry as she feared the raiders. Their path gradually rose toward a ridge. Lily felt her pulse quicken with each step. From such a vantage point they could see for miles, but that also meant they could be seen. Once atop the ridge they crouched behind rocks and surveyed the landscape. Plains and rolling hills stretched beyond sight. A trickle of smoke curled in the distance, possibly from a campfire. Lily's heart fluttered. Could it be the raiders? Wama studied the tracks at their feet and nodded. His expression turned grim, as if confirming Lily's suspicion. They exchanged a glance. Neither needed words to convey that they were closing in on dangerous territory. Lily felt a knot of fear twist in her belly. She recalled the vicious cries of the attackers, the haunting silhouette of the tall stranger. Yet a flicker of resolve ignited inside her. For the sake of her slain companions, she could not turn away now. As dusk enveloped the plains, Lily and Wama advanced cautiously. They crept through the grass hearts, pounding, until they caught sight of the raiders' camp, nestled in a shallow canyon. Fires flickered against rocky walls, revealing a small network of tents and tethered horses. At least a dozen men moved about their voices. A low rumble carried on the wind. Lily's pulse hammered as she recognized the tall stranger who had haunted her nightmares since the massacre. He stood near the largest tent, conferring with a burly, bearded man in a leather vest. Though she could not catch their words, the tall stranger's gestures were heated. She watched him pace around, occasionally spitting into the dirt, arrogance radiating off him. Her veins boiled with anger at the sight. Wama, ever observant, pointed toward a set of wooden crates stacked near the tents. Lily squinted in the firelight. Upon closer inspection, she saw the faint stencils of U.S. cavalry markings. These were stolen goods. Ammunition, possibly food supplies that the raiders had seized either from a supply wagon or a small outpost. Understanding dawned on Lily. These marauders were not a random band of cutthroats. They were systematically pillaging travelers and military shipments alike. Her hand trembled as she gripped the rifle that Wama had salvaged. Could they truly take on so many? She stole a glance at him. His face betrayed no fear, only fierce determination. He guided her back from the ridge into the cover of shrubs. For a long moment, they communicated with gestures. Wama pointed to the canyon mouth, then to the shadows beyond. Lily understood they needed to wait for the right moment. Perhaps exploit the darkness to scout or sabotage. With hearts pounding, they settled in for a long vigil, uncertain if this night would bring them redemption or unleash further tragedy. The night air grew cold as Lily and Wama bided their time, hidden under the brush near the raiders' camp. Every noise, the clink of a tin cup, the whinny of a horse, made Lily's skin prickle. She could feel the presence of these killers just a stone's throw away. Yet adrenaline and a flicker of vengeance kept her alert. She wiped her clammy palms on her skirt, rehearsing in her mind how she might fire the rifle if needed. A few hours into the night, the camp settled. Men huddled around the central fire, exchanging coarse jokes and swigs from flasks. Some drifted into tents, leaving only a pair of sentries awake, half drowsing by the smouldering embers. Lily's nerves tightened like a bowstring. If they were going to do anything, steal supplies or gather information. Now was the time. Wama gestured for Lily to stay put, while he edged closer to the tents. Her heart hammered as she watched him melt into the darkness, graceful as a shadow. Minutes stretched into agonizing eternity. The two sentries remained mostly oblivious, lost in murmured conversation, occasionally flicking their eyes around the perimeter. Suddenly, one of them stood up sharply, peering into the darkness. Lily's chest constricted Had they spotted Wama? She aimed the rifle finger, trembling near the trigger, but the sentry merely spat into the dirt and resumed his post. Another tense minute crawled by before Lily glimpsed Wama returning, clutching something under his buckskin shirt, a stolen map or papers perhaps. They retreated to their hiding spot. Breathless, Wama opened his trophy, a folded piece of parchment, scrawled with roots, and a ledger detailing raided convoys. Lily's blood ran cold. Her wagon train was listed, a small note reading eliminated. A wave of sorrow and anger crashed over her. They had been nothing but tally marks in these men's crimes. No sooner had Lily and Wama withdrawn to relative safety than the camp stirred at first light. From behind a rocky outcrop, they observed the raiders packing up. Some men loaded horses with sacks of what looked like stolen goods, while others bundled up bedrolls. The tall stranger barked orders demanding haste. It seemed they intended to move on swiftly, likely to strike another unsuspecting target before word of their attack could spread. Lily's chest tightened at the sight. She clutched the ledger Wama had stolen, scanning the list of dates and victims. These men had murdered entire families. They had plundered wagon trains and supply lines, leaving no survivors except for her. And if they were not stopped, many more would suffer the same fate. A fierce conviction took hold of her. She whispered to Wama, voice taut with urgency. Although they shared no fluent common tongue, her intent was clear. She wanted to prevent another massacre. Did that mean an ambush here on this morning? Or did it mean racing to Fort Laramie to warn the cavalry? Her heart pounded with indecision. Wama studied her face, then nodded gravely. He understood that this was bigger than mere revenge for Lily's wagon. The violence would continue unless someone intervened. They examined the canyon walls, searching for an advantage. Could two people armed with just a single decent rifle and minimal supplies possibly halt more than a dozen ruthless bandits? The odds seemed laughably slim, yet Lily could not turn her back. She would not flee forever, haunted by the knowledge that those murderers walked free. Wama seemed to share her resolve. Slowly they drew up a plan relying on stealth, the rugged terrain, and a faith in justice that transcended their differences. Dawn shimmered across the plains, signaling that the hour of decision had arrived. Lily's heart hammered like a wild horse in her chest as she and Wama crawled into position along the rocky ridge overlooking the raiders' makeshift corral. The bandits were saddling their mounts, loading rifles and shouting orders for a quick departure. Tension crackled in the air. One wrong move, and Lily knew they could be outnumbered, outgunned, and swiftly killed. Yet a fervor burned inside her. Memories of her friends, the children's laughter around campfires, the merciless bloodshed. Each recollection fueled her determination. She checked the rifle's chamber. 6 bullets. That was all she had before needing a reload, which required precious seconds that might not be available in the midst of battle. Wama crouched nearby, motioned to the bandits' horses. If they could scare the animals into a stampede at the right moment, chaos might ensue, giving Lily and Wama a critical advantage. He nodded at her, and she raised the rifle sighting along its barrel until the tall stranger's silhouette filled her scope. The very man who led the slaughter of her wagon train was in her sights. Her finger hovered over the trigger. She inhaled, steadying her nerves. The plan was to disrupt and confuse, not necessarily to strike from afar and warn them of her presence, but the rage and pain inside her nearly overpowered logic. She wanted to end him. End the nightmare. Her finger tightened around the trigger. Then she froze. Taking a breath, Lily reminded herself that timing was everything. She signaled. Wama, who sent a small stone skittering downhill, startling a group of horses. The animals reared and whinnied, stirring a ripple of commotion among the raiders. The sentries looked around, startled. Lily saw her moment. She squeezed the trigger, exhaling a single silent prayer. The rifle cracked, echoing off the canyon walls. The bullet struck the raiders' supply crate, splintering wood and sending fragments of ammunition scattering in a flash of sparks. For a split second, the bandits froze, heads whipping toward the ridge. Then all hell broke loose. Horses bucked and bolted, the thunder of hooves reverberating through the canyon. Lily scrambled to reload, fumbling as her fingers slicked with sweat. The raiders shouted curses, some diving for cover behind boulders, others attempting to corral panicking steeds. The tall stranger ducked low, scanning the ridge with narrowed eyes. He roared commands, though the chaos swallowed half his words. Using the confusion, Wama darted along a narrow ledge, lobbing small stones to further spook the horses. The animals snorted and reared, tangling reins and trampling gear. Lily's second shot rang out, clipping a bandit's shoulder, sending him spinning to the ground in agony. Her heart lurched at the sight she had never taken a life before, but the memory of the Wagon Massacre steeled her resolve. Returning fire, the raiders peppered the ridge with bullets. Shards of rock exploded near Lily, and she flattened herself, heart hammering. She realized their precarious position. One flanking move by the raiders, and she and Wama would be pinned down. She signaled him frantically, pointing to an outcropping that offered better cover. Together they retreated in a crouch, bullets whizzing overhead. Lily's ears rang. She tasted blood where she had bitten her lip in fear. Despite her trembling limbs, she forced another round into the rifle, determined not to retreat until these killers were driven off or brought to their knees. Amid the bedlam, the tall stranger mounted a horse and gestured to his men, half of whom were already scattering in the stampede. Lily's pulse quickened. He was trying to rally them, or perhaps escape. Either way, the battle was far from over. Through the smoke of gunfire and the swirling dust, Lily locked eyes with the tall stranger. Their gazes collided like clashing swords, brimming with hatred and unresolved bloodlust. He spurred his horse and surged forward, a pistol in one hand, reins in the other. Lily realized he was driving straight for the slope that led up to her vantage point. She had but seconds to act. Time slowed. She raised the rifle once more, aiming for the man's chest. Her breaths came rapid and shallow. She recalled the laughter of the children by the wagons, the gentle hum of a fiddle by the campfire, the horror of that night. Her shot barked, the recoil slamming into her shoulder. The bullet grazed the horse's flank, causing it to shriek and rear. But the man pressed on, teeth bared in a snarl. Wama dashed in from the side, hurling a hunting knife. It whistled past the tall stranger's shoulder, narrowly missing him. With frightening agility, the man leaned off the horse's side, returning fire. The bullet struck a rock near Wama's feet, sending dust into his eyes. Blinded, Wama stumbled, and the tall stranger capitalized on the moment, driving his horse closer. Just as Lily prepared to pull the trigger again, the stranger's horse slammed into her, knocking her off balance. She tumbled to the ground, the rifle flying from her grip. She gasped as the man loomed above her pistol, aimed at her head. His eyes glowed with sadistic triumph. In that heartbeat, Lily believed she had reached the end. But a flash of movement erupted behind the stranger. Wama sprang from the dust, tackling him off the horse. Gunshots resonated, echoing across the canyon. In an instant, the three of them were locked in a savage struggle, each fighting for life in the swirling dirt of the frontier. Their bodies collided in a storm of limbs and dust. Lily coughed, struggling to regain her breath as she scrambled to find the rifle. The tall stranger and Wama thrashed on the ground, each grappling for control. The man's pistol skittered away, but he managed to draw a vicious knife from his belt. He slashed wildly, grazing Wama's arm, causing blood to spatter on the dirt. A desperate surge of energy coursed through Lily. She lunged forward, seized the pistol lying a few feet away. Her hands shook violently as she cocked the hammer, her eyes fixed on the chaos before her. Wama was pinned beneath the taller man's weight, the knife pressed dangerously close to his throat. A primal scream tore from Lily's lungs. She aimed the pistol, her finger tightening on the trigger. In that split second, the tall stranger glanced at her, recognition flickering in his eyes, the same eyes that had watched her cower the night he destroyed her world. Lily fired. The recoil jolted her, and a deafening blast thundered in her ears. Smoke swirled. The tall stranger jerked the knife clattering from his hand. For an interminable moment, he teetered, his eyes widening with shock. Then he collapsed onto the dust blood, staining the ground. Gasping, Lily rushed to Wama's side, tears blurring her vision. He clutched his wounded arm, though it appeared more a nasty gash than a fatal blow. Relief flooded her. She had saved his life. She had avenged her friends. Yet as she stared at the tall stranger's lifeless form, a hollow ache bloomed in her chest. Ending him didn't bring the surge of triumph she expected. Instead, it left an emptiness, a reminder that revenge never truly heals the wounds of tragedy. Around them, the remaining raiders fled into the plains leaderless. Only the wind mourned the dead as Lily and Wama stood in the aftermath of their violent stand. In the hours that followed, Lily and Wama moved cautiously through the raiders' abandoned camp, wary of any stragglers who might still lie in wait. To their relief, most had fled, leaving behind a scattered mess of supplies and stolen goods. Lily's hands still trembled from the shock of having taken a life, her pulse thrumming in her ears, as she forced herself to search for anything of practical use. Food, water, ammunition. Wama found a stash of coins and valuables, likely looted from unsuspecting travelers. Lily recognized a few pieces of jewelry that might have belonged to the families in her caravan, a silver locket, a battered wedding band. A wave of nausea twisted her stomach. She pocketed the items, unsure if there were any next of kin to return them to, but feeling compelled to keep them safe. They discovered the cavalry crates, marked Fort Laramie. Inside were partial munitions and some official documents referencing supply routes and scheduled convoys. Lily held the papers tight, a fresh determination glowing in her. Delivering these to Fort Laramie might prevent future ambushes and save countless innocent lives. More than that, it felt like the right thing to do, a chance to stop this evil from spreading further. Wama's wound needed tending. Using strips of cloth, Lily bound his arm as best she could, washing it with precious water. Though he winced, he offered her a soft nod of gratitude. There was a wordless understanding now, a bond forged in fire and bloodshed. They were survivors, partners in a cause larger than themselves. As dusk approached again, they knew they could not remain in the canyon. The stench of death clung to the air, and the possibility of more bandits returning was too great, or their path now pointed unmistakably toward Fort Laramie, and with it, perhaps a small glimmer of redemption. Stepping away from the canyon felt like walking out of a grim chapter of a story Lily wished to forget. The Wagon Massacre, the desperate flight, the confrontation with the tall stranger. It had carved a permanent scar in her spirit. Yet, as she and Wama forged eastward, guided by the scraps of stolen maps and Wama's innate knowledge of the land, Lily felt the faint beginnings of a new chapter days blurred together in a haze of weary travel. Lily's muscles ached and her lips cracked from thirst. The environment tested them, scorching days with no shade and bitterly cold nights under the endless sky. At times they had to skirt around large buffalo herds, or avoid rumored pockets of hostile outlaws. But the thought of reaching Fort Laramie drove Lily onward. Perhaps she could warn the cavalry about the raiders still roaming these territories, or at least ensure the stolen documents reached responsible hands. Wama led the way with unerring confidence. He read the wind followed subtle markers in the grass and found hidden streams where they could fill their canteens. The silent synergy between them deepened, though they exchanged few words, relying mostly on gestures and the occasional phrase in halting English. They functioned as a team, each watchful for the other's safety. At night, they took turns keeping watch, wary of circling coyotes and potential human threats. On one such evening, as they crouched by a small campfire, Lily found herself staring at Wama's arm, where the wound had begun to mend. She quietly whispered her gratitude. In his dark eyes, she saw neither condemnation nor anger, only a shared understanding. They were both foreigners in each other's world, yet in their union lay the only hope of surviving the savage frontier. Just 2 days' journey from Fort Laramie, Lily and Wama came upon a small frontier outpost, a trading post of sorts with a wooden structure and a few tents pitched around it, eager for fresh supplies and possibly a horse. Lily approached with cautious hope. Perhaps they could travel faster and safer to the fort if they purchased or bartered for a mount. A wiry middle-aged man who introduced himself as Amos Greeley ran the outpost. He greeted Lily politely enough, though his glance at Wama was tinged with discomfort. "A Cheyenne, huh? Well, times are uncertain," he muttered. Lily tried to reassure him they meant no trouble. She showed him the cavalry papers, hinting at their importance, hoping it might encourage him to lend assistance. At first, Greeley seemed willing to help, offering a battered mare at a decent price. He even poured them each a mug of lukewarm coffee. But as dusk fell, Lily felt uneasy. She couldn't pinpoint why until she noticed Greeley speaking in hushed tones to 2 rough-looking men by a wagon. She caught the words "reward" and "wanted." The realization struck her like a punch. Greeley was planning to sell them out. Maybe the raiders had placed a bounty on survivors who might report their crimes, or maybe Greeley just feared the Cheyenne enough to want them gone. Lily whispered her suspicions to Wama, who had also observed the suspicious glances. They hastily prepared to depart, but the men surrounded them, guns drawn. "She's coming with us," one man snarled. "There's a buyer who wants to know what she's seen. And the Indian, well, that's another matter entirely." Fear clutched Lily's throat. She realized that betrayal could come in many forms out here. And this time they were outnumbered, cornered in the fading light. It happened swiftly. As Greeley's men advanced, Lily's heart pounded with dread. Their eyes gleamed with greed, and they made no attempt to hide their malicious intent. Lily lifted her hands in a placating gesture, stalling for time while Wama tensed beside her, ready for a final stand. But the men's arrogance was their undoing. One of them failed to notice a worn crate perched precariously on a wagon sideboard. As he lunged forward to seize Lily, his boot snagged on the wagon's wheel, causing him to stumble. In his flailing attempt to right himself, his finger jerked the trigger of his pistol. The shot rang out in the still evening air, striking the other man in the thigh, cursing in pain. That man fired back reflexively, bullets whizzing wildly. Pandemonium erupted. Greeley shouted, stumbling backward to avoid the line of fire, accidentally knocking over a lantern. Flames licked hungrily at the dry wooden boards of the trading post. Screaming, Greeley tried to douse the fire, but the blaze spread with frightening speed. Hard karma, Lily thought, as the men who sought to betray them found themselves tangled in their own violence. Amid the confusion, Lily and Wama seized their chance. Wama snatched a rifle propped against a barrel, firing a warning shot into the air. the men now consumed by their own injuries, and the mounting inferno scattered in panic. Greeley's shouts for help were lost in the roar of flames. Eyes wide with adrenaline, Lily grabbed the battered mare's reins and leapt astride. She hoisted Wama up behind her, ignoring the pain in her exhausted muscles. The horse reared, spooked by the smoke, but Lily spurred it forward. They galloped into the night, leaving the traitors to face the blistering consequences of their own misdeeds. The final leg of their journey to Fort Laramie was a blur of fatigue dust and smouldering fury for all that had transpired. Lily could barely keep her eyes open, yet she pressed on. Wama's presence behind her. On the horse was a steady anchor, his hands lightly resting on her waist. His breaths labored from blood loss and exhaustion. Still, he never complained. They rode in relative silence, each consumed by thoughts of what lay ahead. At last, the grey light of dawn revealed the silhouette of a stockade perched near the banks of the Laramie River. Tall wooden walls, a small cluster of buildings, and the fluttering stars and stripes marked Fort Laramie. Relief and anxiety warred within Lily's chest. She had heard tales that the cavalry at Fort Laramie sometimes turned away desperate travelers, citing limited resources. Others said they were protective, but suspicious of outsiders, especially Native Americans. Approaching the gate, Lily felt her pulse quicken. A sentry called out a challenge. She raised her arms in a sign of peace, explaining that she carried urgent information about raider attacks on the plains. Several uniformed soldiers emerged, rifles in hand. One officer, a lean man with a braided mustache, demanded they dismount. Lily slid off the mare, unsteady on her feet. She held out the documents taken from the raiders' camp ledgers of stolen goods, schedules of supply routes. "Please," she rasped her throat. "Raw, you have to see this. People are dying out there." Cautiously, the officer took the papers. His hard stare shifted from Lily to Wama. Lingering with distrust, Lily prayed he would read them with an open mind. The survival of countless others could hinge on what happened in these next moments. She braced herself for the unknown, hoping the fort's promise of refuge would finally become reality. A tense hush fell over the courtyard as the officer who introduced himself as Captain Mortimer Gaines pored over the raiders' ledger. Soldiers ringed Lily and Wama in a loose semicircle, rifles lowered but ready. The fort's morning bustle seemed to pause, onlookers craning their necks to see the spectacle. Lily's heart thundered in her chest. Captain Gaines looked up, brow furrowed. "These are official cavalry supply records," he said, tapping the ledger. "How on earth did you come by them?" Lily quickly recounted her story: the Wagon Massacre, her narrow escape, Wama's assistance, the confrontation in the canyon, and the betrayal at the outpost. She spoke in halting gasps, her voice trembling with both exhaustion and emotion. The men exchanged glances, skeptical, yet unable to dismiss the authenticity of the seized documents. Gaines studied. Wama gaze narrowing. "We've had trouble with some Cheyenne renegades, but not enough to account for these kinds of raids," he muttered. Wama, though he understood little English, did not flinch beneath the scrutiny. He stood tall, one hand pressed against the binding over his wounded arm. Lily couldn't tell what he was thinking, but she hoped he felt the solidarity she tried to convey. Finally, Gaines spoke again. "I'll alert my superior. This matter concerns the entire region." He motioned for his men to stand down. "We'll treat your injuries and see about lodging," he announced to Lily. Then, turning to Wama, he added more reluctantly, "I don't know what your part in this is, but I suppose we owe you thanks if you truly helped stop these raiders." Relief shuddered through Lily like a tidal wave. They were safe for now. She offered Wama a grateful smile. At long last, her story had found ears willing to listen, And perhaps this was the first step toward genuine justice for the fallen. For the first time since the massacre, Lily slept on a real cot beneath a solid roof. Though the wooden bunkhouse walls were austere with cracks that whistled in the wind, it felt like luxury. She awoke to find a nurse wrapping a fresh bandage around her bruised ribs, and a calm hush over the fort punctuated by distant hammering and soldiers' muffled voices. Captain Gaines had arranged for Lily to share her account with the fort's commandant, Major Whitfield, that afternoon. She was anxious. Reliving the horrors of the wagon attack churned her stomach, yet she knew it was vital to preventing further bloodshed. Wamar, meanwhile, received medical attention for his arm. The fort doctor scowled at first, but performed the dressing competently. Lily noticed the soldier's wariness around her Cheyenne companion. She prayed tensions would not escalate. When she finally met Major Whitfield in his modest office, the officer was stoic but intrigued by the ledger. "Miss Harrington, you've been through hell. These documents confirm suspicions that rogue militias are raiding supply routes." His voice held a note of quiet fury. "We've had reports of an organized group hitting convoys, but we never had proof until now." Lily took a shaky breath. "They're vicious, sir. They destroyed our entire wagon train. If not for Wamar, I would have died too." She saw the major's jaw tighten. Perhaps he understood the complexity of trust between a U.S. fort and a Cheyenne scout. "With your permission," Lily continued softly, "we'd like to help you bring an end to this. We know where their strongholds might be." He seemed taken aback by her resolve. After a moment, he nodded solemnly. "We'll see. For now, rest. You've earned it." Something in his tone hinted that at last Lily might see a glimmer of justice and a path to heal her wounded heart. Days passed in a whirlwind of preparations. The fort buzzed with activity. After Lily's and Wamar's revelations, scouts were dispatched to verify rumored raider hideouts, and the cavalry readied horses and supplies for a punitive expedition. Lily found herself unexpectedly advising the officers, using her first-hand knowledge of the canyon ambush site, and the raiders' patterns gleaned from the ledger. Wamar kept a watchful distance. Although some soldiers eyed him with suspicion, he aided them by marking places on a map, presumably significant Cheyenne hunting grounds or known travel routes. Lily noticed a subtle respect blossoming among certain scouts. They recognized skill in his tracking capabilities, though old prejudices died hard. During quieter moments, Lily visited the small chapel on the fort's grounds. She lit a candle for the souls lost during the massacre, whispering silent prayers. The act brought a trembling sense of catharsis. She had seen the raiders scattered, and their leader vanquished. While it did not erase her grief, she felt a burden ease from her heart. Meanwhile, Captain Gaines conferred with Major Whitfield. They approached Lily with a proposal she could remain at Fort Laramie, at least for the near future, assisting in communication with nearby settler groups. "We could use someone who understands both the traveler's plight and the dangers of the frontier." Gaines admitted. Lily hesitated. She had never pictured herself working for the military, but she yearned to ensure no more wagons met the fate of hers. She also felt loyalty to Wamar, who had saved her life more than once. No final decision was made. Instead, Lily stepped outside to find Wamar, leaning against a post. Their eyes met. They shared a faint smile, wordless gratitude, that they were both alive, forging a fragile but hopeful alliance in a land where blood and dust often overshadowed hope. On a cool morning near the close of summer, a cavalry patrol led by Captain Gaines rode out of Fort Laramie with Lily and Wamar in tow. Their mission was to confirm rumors of another band of raiders regrouping further north. Lily felt a mixture of trepidation and resolve. She had survived one confrontation. Could she stomach another? Yet the dream of preventing another wagon tragedy spurred her on. The patrol wound its way through grassy hills and rocky ravines. Wama guided them with measured confidence, pausing to inspect hoof prints or freshly broken branches. Lily rode near the captain, watching for any sign of trouble. They encountered a few scattered travelers who shared unsettling tales, reports of stolen horses, missing goods, the occasional disappearance. No one had been killed, but the tension in the region was palpable. 2 days out, they found evidence of a small camp, recently abandoned embers, still glowed in a ring of stones. Captain Gaines dismounted, scanning the footprints with a furrowed brow. Wama crouched, touching the dirt, then stood, his expression grim. Lily's pulse quickened. In the quiet they heard it, a distant rumble, like thunder. Her heart pounded. Hoofbeats. The cavalry drew into a defensive formation, rifles at the ready. Over a rise to the east, a cluster of riders appeared. At first glance, Lily feared it was another posse of raiders. Yet as they drew closer, she realized they were cavalry reinforcements returning from a separate patrol. She exhaled shakily, relieved at the presence of more legitimate lawmen. But her relief was short-lived. The reinforcements carried grim tidings. Another wagon train bound for Idaho had been attacked. Survivors recounted men in battered hats and dust-laden coats, not entirely unlike the ones Lily and Wama had fought. The violence was not over. The shadow of the frontier's lawlessness persisted, and the final reckoning still lay ahead. Lily felt a deep ache in her soul upon hearing of another wagon train falling victim. She knew all too well the terror those settlers had experienced. That night, as the cavalry made camp, she walked a short distance from the tents, gazing up at the vast constellations overhead. Each star felt like a distant memory, a life lost, or a hope ignited. She wondered if the fallen from her caravan watched over her. Now urging her forward, Wama joined her silent as a spectre in the tall grass. Though they lacked a fluent language, Lily tried to convey her sorrow about the new victims. He placed a hand gently on her shoulder. In his dark eyes, she saw empathy, as though he carried the weight of all the battles and betrayals between his people and the encroaching settlers. They were both entangled in the frontier's tragic tapestry. Hard karma hovered over this land, dispensing retribution and sorrow with impartial ruthlessness. The raiders who massacred Lily's caravan met their downfall through their own savage greed. Greeley's betrayal had been answered by flames, yet the cycle of violence refused to break so easily. Innocent families continued to perish, raising the question, could any measure of justice truly stem the tide? The next morning, Lily resolved to press on with the patrol. She might never find complete peace, but she could help spare others from sharing her fate. Wama supported her decision, though a melancholic acceptance shadowed his face. He too must have known that more blood would likely be shed before the frontier found harmony or devoured all who dared stake a claim on these wild plains. Still they stood side by side, determined to face whatever storms lay ahead. In a land of raw survival, perhaps that act alone was a small triumph of hope. Before the cavalry patrol could locate the new group of raiders, word reached them that a band of vigilantes, other settlers fed up with the lawless land, had taken matters into their own hands. News of a confrontation came swiftly, a bloody clash, multiple casualties on both sides. By the time Lily and the patrol arrived at the scene, the ground was stained with the grim remnants of a desperate battle. In the eerie quiet, Lily walked among the fallen. Some wore the mismatched garb of frontier settlers, pitchforks and hunting rifles clutched in cold fingers. Others bore the battered hats and dusty coats of mercenaries. No clear victor, only corpses. Captain Gaines cursed under his breath. "This territory is tearing itself apart," he muttered, motioning for his men to search for wounded survivors. Lily helped in the grim task, heart heavy. But in the thick tension, she realized something important. Many of the raiders matched descriptions from the ledger. Perhaps this was the last major fragment of the group that had destroyed her wagon train. A ragtag band of vicious opportunists, undone by outraged settlers. Was this closure or just another twist of cruelty? She knelt beside a young settler who clung to life with a bullet in his abdomen. He croaked a warning. "If folks can't trust the army, if folks can't rely on the law, they'll keep picking up guns themselves." His words rattled Lily. Even if one band of raiders was gone, the cycle of fear and violence might rage on when all was said and done. Lily mounted her horse, Wama at her side. Together with the cavalry, they prepared to return to Fort Laramie, carrying wounded survivors and haunting memories. Yet in Lily's chest, a small ember of hope still glowed. No matter the darkness, she would keep fighting for a future where tragedy did not rule the prairie. She owed that much to the fallen and to herself. And so ends this chapter of the frontier's wild tapestry, a land shaped by both triumph and tragedy. Lily Harrington, once an innocent traveler, found purpose beyond her personal vengeance, forging an unlikely alliance with Wama, the Cheyenne scout who saved her life. Though the raiders who brought such horror to her wagon train have been scattered or destroyed, the true challenge remains to foster understanding and justice on a frontier often governed by ruthless lawlessness. If this gripping tale of survival resilience and hard-fought redemption has moved you, please consider supporting the channel. Like this video to help it reach more listeners, share it with fellow fans of frontier dramas, and subscribe for more stories that dive deep into the human spirit. Your engagement keeps these stories alive, reminding us that even in the darkest moments, courage and hope can still blaze a trail forward.